Billionaire Secrets Exposed. Top researcher spent years studying the wealthy. Let me be brutally honest with you right now. There is a reason the richest 1% keep getting richer while the rest of the world fights for scraps. And no, it's not luck, it's not intelligence, and it's definitely not because they work harder. In fact, most of the billionaires studied in this groundbreaking research project don't work more than the average entrepreneur. So what's happening? What do they know that the rest of humanity doesn't? That's the question a top researcher spent years investigating. He traveled the world, interviewed self-made billionaires, shadowed founders of massive companies, analyzed psychological patterns of ultra-high net worth individuals, and dug into the hidden mechanics of wealth creation that aren't taught in schools, business degrees, or motivational books. And what he discovered is so shocking, so profoundly transformative, that once you hear it, you will never look at money or your own potential the same way again. Because here's the truth, the world has been hiding from you. Billionaires don't live in the same mental universe as everyone else. They walk through the same world you and I walk through, but their minds operate under a completely different set of rules, a different perception, a different internal identity, a different relationship with opportunity, fear, and possibility. And today, you're about to hear exactly what separates them from the rest. Not theories, not clichés, not motivational fluff, but the actual psychological, neurological, and behavioral patterns that create extraordinary wealth and keep it growing. If you've ever felt like you were meant for something bigger, if you've ever sensed that a richer, more powerful, more abundant version of you is trying to emerge, if you've ever wondered why some people rise effortlessly while others drown in struggle, this video will answer those questions with a clarity that might shake you. So take a deep breath, open your mind, because the secrets you're about to hear are the same ones that turned ordinary people into billionaires, and they have the power to rewrite your life from the inside out. Let's begin. Topic 1. The uncomfortable truth. Billionaires don't think like the rest of the world. There's a moment in the researcher's journey that changed everything. He was interviewing a billionaire who built a global logistics empire from nothing. No investors, no family money, not even a college degree. And when he asked, "What do you think makes you different from the millions of people who never break out of financial survival?" The billionaire didn't hesitate. He leaned in, smiled slightly, and said, "The difference isn't what I do. The difference is what I see." That line haunted the researcher for months. What I see? What does that even mean? Eventually, he realized it was the key to everything. Because billionaires literally perceive reality differently. Their mental filters, the invisible lens through which they interpret the world, are not aligned with limitation, fear, or scarcity. They are aligned with expansion, possibility, and inevitability. They walk into the same situations as everyone else, but they interpret those situations through a mindset that naturally attracts opportunity instead of repelling it. Think about it. Two people look at the same problem. One sees disaster. The billionaire sees leverage. One sees a closed door. The billionaire sees a hallway of doors no one else noticed. One gives up. The billionaire leans in. This isn't superstition. It's a neurological pattern sharpened through years of conditioning, choices, identity, and self-belief. One of the billionaires interviewed said something almost unbelievable. "Most people wait for certainty. I wait for a reason to act, and then I move before the certainty arrives." This wasn't recklessness. It was identity-level confidence. Billionaires don't make decisions based on present circumstances. They make decisions based on the future they've already committed to emotionally. This is why Elon Musk pushed forward with reusable rockets long before the math said it was possible. It's why Jeff Bezos stayed committed to Amazon despite years of losses. It's why Bernard Arnault, the billionaire behind LVMH, continued acquiring luxury brands even when the market predicted decline. They weren't reacting to the world. They were responding to their internal vision. And here's where things get fascinating. The researcher found that wealthy individuals have a completely different relationship with identity. They don't hope to be wealthy someday. They live as wealth creators long before the world recognizes them as such. They see themselves as builders of empires before those empires exist. They view themselves as capable of extraordinary outcomes, even when the evidence in their environment says otherwise. It's not delusion, it's design. Because the brain follows identity like a compass. If you believe you're meant for more, your mind begins to generate ideas, clarity, strategies, and actions that validate that belief. If you believe wealth is natural for you, opportunities seem to appear more often because your brain is trained to notice them. If you believe your purpose is to create something big, life bends to meet you there. Most people operate from the identity their environment gave them. Billionaires operate from the identity they chose. And identity creates behavior. Behavior creates outcomes. Outcomes create wealth. Another powerful insight came from analyzing how billionaires perceive risk. They don't avoid risk, they redefine it. To them, the greatest risk isn't failing, it's staying the same. They view inaction as a far more dangerous threat than action. This perspective alone shifts their entire decision-making process. While most people hesitate, billionaires initiate. While others doubt, billionaires test. While the average person fears losing money, billionaires fear losing time. And that single distinction changes everything. Imagine living with a mental model where you trust your ability to recover from any failure, where setbacks are simply data, not identity wounds, where money is a tool instead of something you chase. The researcher found that this emotional resilience, this almost unshakable neutrality toward challenges, is one of the strongest predictors of extreme wealth. But here's the part that will challenge you deeply. The wealthy don't just think differently, they feel differently. Their emotional patterns are wired toward expansion, not contraction. When uncertainty appears, they feel curiosity instead of fear. When a door closes, they feel intrigued instead of defeated. When something goes wrong, they feel activated instead of paralyzed. This emotional calibration is what allows them to navigate chaos when everyone else collapses under pressure. And perhaps the most profound discovery of all was this. Billionaires don't see wealth as something they pursue. They see it as something they create naturally by becoming the kind of person capable of producing it. Wealth is not the goal. It is the byproduct of thinking, perceiving, choosing, and believing at a higher level than the world around them. As the researcher summarized it, billionaires are not born with special abilities. They are born with the same mental hardware as everyone else, but they install a different operating system. And that operating system is available to you right now, if you choose it. Because the moment you shift your identity, your beliefs, your emotional reactions, and your interpretations of reality, you stop living like the world's rules apply to you. You start living like the creator of your reality, and your life begins to change in ways that seem almost supernatural. That's the uncomfortable truth about wealth, and it's also the doorway to your transformation. Topic 2. The mental blueprint of wealth. How billionaires program their minds for inevitable success. There comes a point in every transformational journey when you realize that the world you experience isn't created by your circumstances. It's created by the architecture of your mind. And this was the breakthrough that stunned the researcher studying billionaires. After years of interviews, private conversations, shadowing self-made empire builders, and decoding their patterns, he uncovered something extraordinary. Wealth is not just a financial condition. It is a psychological frequency, a mental operating system, a state of consciousness that shapes perception long before it shapes reality. What he discovered was that self-made billionaires do not think, feel, interpret, or respond to life the way most people do. Their internal world is calibrated differently, and that calibration acts like a magnet, pulling opportunity toward them and amplifying it at every stage. They aren't simply making better decisions, they are thinking from a deeper dimension of awareness, a completely different relationship with possibility, identity, and time. Their minds are structured for success in the same way world-class athletes' bodies are structured for high performance. The researcher noticed this first during an interview with a senior executive who worked closely with Jeff Bezos in Amazon's early days. When asked how Bezos maintained vision during years of doubt, uncertainty, and financial instability, the executive said, "Jeff wasn't reacting to the present. He was reacting to the future. He was mentally living in the world Amazon would one day dominate, long before the rest of us could even see it." That observation became a repeating pattern across the entire study. Billionaires anchor their minds in the future, and because they think from that future, they naturally move toward decisions that align with it. Meanwhile, most people anchor themselves to the past. They interpret life through old stories, old failures, old fears, and old limitations. And because the brain is constantly filtering reality through the lens of the identity it believes, the past repeats itself. Billionaires break that psychological loop by refusing to allow their identity to be shaped by circumstance. They choose their identity. They construct it deliberately. And once that identity becomes internalized, their brain begins behaving in alignment with it. Another striking example came from a conversation with an early investor who partnered with Elon Musk. He explained that Elon never interpreted difficulties as signs to stop. Instead, he treated challenges like data points, information, nothing emotional, nothing personal. Musk's emotional neutrality gave him an incredible advantage. He could stay rational, strategic, and creative, while others would collapse under pressure. This pattern was consistent across many billionaires. Emotional regulation was a defining factor in their long-term success. The researcher began noticing something profound in the internal dialogue of wealthy individuals. Their thoughts didn't spiral into fear the way the average person's thoughts do. They didn't catastrophize. They didn't interpret temporary setbacks as personal failures. Instead, they held a calm, almost detached awareness that the mind's first reaction is rarely the truth. This allowed them to pause, breathe, and choose responses that aligned with their future vision instead of their immediate emotions. Their inner voice was disciplined, intentional, and constructive. And here is where things get even more fascinating. Billionaires use imagination as a tool for neurological programming. When they visualize the future, they aren't fantasizing. They're rehearsing. They're wiring their brain to become familiar with possibilities that haven't manifested yet. Because the mind cannot distinguish between deeply imagined experiences and real ones, wealthy individuals essentially build neural pathways before the results occur in the physical world. Their brain begins treating success as normal, expected, and natural. So when opportunities appear, they don't freeze. They recognize them instantly. One of the billionaires interviewed described this phenomenon perfectly. "I don't wait for the world to make me feel wealthy. I generate the feeling first, because feelings determine choices, and choices determine outcomes." That statement reflects decades of research in neuroscience. When the internal state changes, the brain's pattern recognition changes. It begins seeing resources instead of obstacles, solutions instead of problems, and openings instead of dead ends. This perceptual shift compounds over time, leading to opportunities others are literally blind to. Another psychological pattern the researcher uncovered was how billionaires perceive discomfort. For most people, discomfort activates self-doubt. It triggers old fears. It shrinks possibility. But wealthy individuals interpret discomfort as confirmation they are expanding. To them, discomfort is not a warning. It is proof of growth. This redefinition is what allows them to embrace uncertainty with excitement instead of fear. While the average person retreats into safety, billionaires step into expansion. Their relationship with risk also differs dramatically. They aren't reckless, but they understand a fundamental truth. Stagnation is more dangerous than failure. Not trying is riskier than trying. Staying the same threatens their future more than any temporary setback ever could. This mindset frees them from the paralysis that traps so many people. They don't chase guarantee, they chase alignment. They choose the path that evolves them, not the one that comforts them. One particularly powerful insight came from a private real estate billionaire who told the researcher, "People think I'm successful because I make great investments. But the truth is, the investments are great because of who I've become." In other words, wealth didn't create his mindset. His mindset created the wealth. Once he adopted the identity of a wealth creator, everything he touched began to reflect that identity. His decisions improved, his awareness expanded, his intuition sharpened, his sense of timing became precise. This wasn't magic. It was alignment between belief, emotional state, and action. The researcher's most important conclusion was this: wealth is a mental blueprint, a psychological mold, and every person is living inside a blueprint, most of them unconsciously. If someone's blueprint is shaped by scarcity, they will sabotage abundance. If their blueprint is shaped by self-doubt, they will hesitate in moments of opportunity. If their blueprint is shaped by past failures, their brain will seek consistency with those failures. But if the blueprint shifts to one of worthiness, capacity, vision, and future identity, everything changes. Thoughts change, emotions change, choices change, and the external world reorganizes itself to match the internal one. The inner world is always the first world. And billionaires understand this so deeply that they treat mindset not as self-help, but as infrastructure. They build their inner architecture first. And the outer architecture, the wealth, the opportunities, the breakthroughs, emerges naturally as a result. Most people try to change their life from the outside in. Billionaires change their life from the inside out. And that is why they create results that seem impossible to others. This is the mental blueprint of wealth. And the moment you begin reprogramming your inner world with intention and discipline, you activate the same mechanisms that have shaped the greatest fortunes on Earth. Topic 3. The wealth frequency. Why billionaires attract opportunities most people never see. There's a moment in the researcher's study where he realized something almost unbelievable. Billionaires aren't just making better choices. Opportunities themselves seem to gravitate toward them. It was as if they were walking through a different version of reality, one where doors opened before they even reached them. At first, he assumed this was due to luck, or connections, or simply being in the right place at the right time. But the deeper he looked, the clearer it became. Billionaires operate at a different internal frequency, and that frequency determines what they notice, what they attract, and what becomes possible for them. This concept might sound mystical, but it's not. It's psychological, neurological, and behavioral. The wealth frequency is simply the internal state, emotional, mental, and identity-based, that shapes what your mind filters in and what it filters out. Everyone has experienced this on a smaller scale. For example, when you're thinking about buying a new car, suddenly you see that exact model everywhere. The cars didn't magically appear. Your brain simply became attuned to noticing them. Billionaires live in that heightened state constantly, but instead of cars, they notice opportunities, patterns in markets, unmet needs, inefficiencies, emerging technologies, and hidden leverage points no one else sees. The researcher understood this more clearly during an interview with a venture capitalist who built partnerships with some of the world's biggest tech names. He said something unforgettable. Opportunities are everywhere, but most people aren't tuned to the frequency where those opportunities become visible. That statement stayed with the researcher because it suggested something powerful. Wealth isn't just created through hard work, it's created through awareness, and awareness is shaped by the lens through which you filter reality. Consider someone like Warren Buffett. His genius isn't that he sees everything, it's that he notices the right things. He perceives value where others only see noise. He notices long-term potential in moments the world sees short-term chaos. This ability isn't luck. It's a mental frequency tuned to opportunity. Or think about Mark Zuckerberg, who saw the social potential of online networks long before the world understood how deeply digital relationships would shape society. These individuals weren't reacting to trends. They were sensing them before they matured. The researcher discovered that wealthy individuals have trained their minds to seek possibility by default. While most people scan the world for threats, billionaires scan for openings. They don't walk into a room thinking, "What could go wrong?" They walk in thinking, "Where is the leverage? Where is the hidden gap? What is the unseen angle everyone else has missed?" This subtle shift in perception changes their entire trajectory. Because the brain, when instructed to search for opportunity, will always find it. And when instructed to search for danger, it will find that too. Here's where things get even more interesting. The wealthy don't just notice opportunities, they magnetize them. Their energy, confidence, clarity, and identity naturally attract people, resources, and ideas. When someone speaks with confidence, others want to follow. When someone carries certainty, investors become curious. When someone communicates vision with clarity, collaborators appear seemingly out of nowhere. This is why billionaires often say they don't chase opportunities. Opportunities chase them. The researcher witnessed this firsthand when shadowing an entrepreneur who later became the CEO of a major global tech firm. Everywhere this man went, people approached him with ideas, partnerships, and invitations. It wasn't because he was famous. It was because his presence radiated the energy of someone who could make things happen. People feel drawn to creators, visionaries, and leaders who carry a sense of purpose and direction. Billionaires operate with such internal conviction that the world responds in kind. Another fascinating insight emerged when analyzing how billionaires frame problems. Most people avoid problems. Billionaires search for them. They understand that every problem, every frustration, every inefficiency, every unmet need is a potential fortune disguised as inconvenience. The researcher found that this mindset shift alone separates creators from consumers. Consumers complain about problems. Creators capitalize on them. And billionaires, above all, are the highest-level creators. One billionaire explained it this way: "Every time I encounter a problem, I ask myself, how many millions is this problem worth? Most people run from difficulty. I run toward it." That mindset, the researcher realized, is one of the core elements of the wealth frequency. It transforms the way you relate to the world. Instead of feeling powerless when something goes wrong, you feel activated. Instead of shrinking, you expand. Instead of frustration, you feel curiosity. And that curiosity often leads to solutions that evolve into massive businesses. Think of Reed Hastings, who was frustrated by a late fee at a video rental store. That frustration became the seed for one of the most disruptive companies in entertainment history. Or Sarah Blakely, who noticed discomfort in traditional undergarments and turned that problem into a billion-dollar empire. These breakthroughs didn't come from chasing wealth. They came from tuning into the frequency of opportunity hidden inside everyday experiences. The researcher realized that the wealth frequency also affects how billionaires use language. They speak with intention, clarity, and conviction. Their words reinforce their vision. They don't say, "I hope," or "I wish." They say, "I will," and "I am building." Their language anchors their identity, and their identity shapes their actions. Over time, this creates a self-fulfilling trajectory. They become the type of person who turns ideas into reality, and the world begins treating them that way. But perhaps the most profound insight came from noticing how billionaires interpret possibility. The average person asks, "Is this possible?" Billionaires ask, "How can I make this possible?" It's a completely different orientation toward reality. One relies on permission, the other relies on creation. This subtle change in question rewires the mind to seek pathways where none existed before. And once the mind begins searching, solutions appear, not because they weren't there before, but because the mind wasn't conditioned to notice them. The researcher concluded that the wealth frequency is not mystical. It is intentional. It is built through identity, emotion, perception, and disciplined thought. It's built through how you speak to yourself, how you interpret challenges, how you respond to uncertainty, how you imagine your future, and how you move even when clarity hasn't arrived yet. Over time, these internal patterns compound into an external life filled with opportunities most people never see. The wealthy aren't lucky. They're tuned in. They're aligned. They're operating from an entirely different internal frequency, one that attracts possibility like a magnet. And the moment you begin tuning your mind to that same frequency, the world begins to reveal doors you never knew existed. Topic 4. The Billionaire Decision Code. How the wealthy think faster, clearer, and better than everyone else. There is a point in the researcher's investigation where everything clicked. When he finally understood why billionaires make decisions that seem almost superhuman in hindsight. He realized that billionaires aren't just thinking differently, they are deciding differently. Their choices follow a pattern, a kind of internal algorithm that guides them toward wealth while the rest of the world remains paralyzed by hesitation, fear, or indecision. The researcher named this pattern the Billionaire Decision Code because it functions like a mental software program that consistently produces extraordinary outcomes. One of the most striking discoveries was how quickly billionaires make decisions compared to the average person. But this speed isn't impulsive. It comes from clarity of identity and vision. When someone knows who they are and what they're building, decisions become easier. The noise of doubt fades, the confusion dissolves, and choices that once felt overwhelming suddenly feel obvious. Billionaires don't waste mental energy questioning their worthiness, second-guessing their abilities, or waiting for perfect conditions. Their certainty doesn't come from knowing the outcome. It comes from trusting their ability to navigate whatever happens next. The researcher learned this firsthand during a conversation with a former executive who worked with Steve Jobs. He explained that Jobs had an unusual ability to cut through the clutter and identify the essence of a situation within seconds. He could walk into a room, listen to a 10-minute explanation, and summarize the real decision that needed to be made in one sentence. This wasn't intuition, it was mental discipline. Jobs had trained his mind to filter out distractions and focus on what truly mattered, a trait the researcher saw repeated across countless ultra-successful individuals. The Billionaire Decision Code isn't about making perfect choices, it's about making aligned choices. Billionaires choose based on the identity they are stepping into, not the circumstances they are currently in. They make decisions as their future self, not their present self. They ask questions like, "What move aligns with the empire I am building?" instead of, "What decision feels safest right now?" This forward-focused thinking allows them to bypass the emotional turbulence that keeps most people stuck. Their decisions are rooted in expansion, not protection. Another revealing insight surfaced during interviews with leaders in private equity. These individuals manage massive portfolios and face enormous pressure, yet they consistently remain calm in situations that would overwhelm the average person. The researcher found that they do not make decisions from a state of anxiety. If they feel emotional turbulence, they pause, they breathe, they recenter. They make decisions only once their mind is clear, steady, and aligned. This emotional neutrality gives them an advantage. They aren't blinded by fear or distorted by doubt. They see reality more accurately. Contrast this with how most people make decisions. They choose from fear. They choose from scarcity. They choose from the desire to avoid loss instead of the desire to create gain. And because the brain is wired to validate whatever emotional state you're in, decisions made from fear lead to more situations that reinforce fear. Billionaires break this cycle. They treat their emotional state as part of their decision-making environment. They understand that clarity is a skill, not a gift. They cultivate it deliberately. Another dimension of the Billionaire Decision Code lies in how the wealthy interpret mistakes. Billionaires do not fear making the wrong decision because they do not assign identity to outcomes. If something goes wrong, they don't collapse into self-blame or shame. They treat it as data, information, feedback from reality. This allows them to pivot quickly instead of wasting time spiraling emotionally. Their lack of attachment to being right makes them more adaptable, more resilient, and more efficient in building wealth. One billionaire told the researcher something that perfectly captured this mindset. "Most people take too long to decide because they're terrified of being wrong. I'm terrified of standing still." That sentence is the essence of the billionaire psychology. Stagnation is the real enemy. Indecision is the true danger. Because every moment spent hesitating is a moment lost, a moment where an opportunity could have been seized, a skill could have been built, a connection could have been strengthened, or a new direction could have been explored. The researcher also noticed that billionaires do not engage in decision fatigue the way most people do. Their lives are optimized to reduce unnecessary choices so they can focus on the decisions that truly matter. They do not waste mental bandwidth on trivialities. Their mornings are structured. Their routines are simple. Their focus is intentional. Because they understand that every decision requires energy, and the fewer unimportant decisions they make, the more energy they have for the choices that shape their destiny. One of the most fascinating things the researcher uncovered is that billionaires make decisions before they feel ready. They don't wait for confidence because they understand that confidence is a byproduct of action, not a prerequisite. They decide, then grow into the version of themselves who can handle the consequences of that decision. This pattern explains why they move faster than everyone else. While the rest of the world waits for certainty, billionaires move toward the uncertainty that holds their next level. Another crucial element of the Billionaire Decision Code is long-term thinking. While the average person makes decisions for comfort, billionaires make decisions for trajectory. They choose the path that expands their future, even if it feels uncomfortable in the moment. Their vision acts like an internal compass, guiding each decision toward a future reality that already feels familiar to them. The researcher noticed that billionaires constantly ask themselves questions like, "How will this decision shape who I am becoming?" They don't evaluate decisions based on temporary emotions. They evaluate decisions based on long-term identity. The more the researcher studied this decision-making pattern, the clearer it became. Billionaires are not defined by intelligence alone. They are defined by decisiveness. Their ability to act with clarity, confidence, and alignment gives them a psychological advantage that compounds over time. Every decision builds momentum. Every choice reinforces identity. Every action strengthens the belief that they are capable of shaping reality. In the end, the Billionaire Decision Code is about internal alignment. It's about making choices from the version of yourself that is already wealthy, powerful, and capable, not the version shaped by fear, insecurity, or the past. The wealthy become wealthy because their decisions consistently pull them toward expansion while the world retreats into safety. They act when others freeze. They trust when others doubt. They build when others hesitate. And through this relentless alignment between identity, intention, and action, they create lives that seem extraordinary to anyone living outside that frequency. Understanding this decision code is the key to stepping into your next level. Because once you learn to make decisions like a billionaire, you begin creating results that align with that level of power, clarity, and purpose. Topic 5. The power of internal identity. Why you can only earn at the level you believe you deserve. There is a recurring theme that appeared in almost every billionaire interview the researcher conducted, a truth so profound that it became impossible to ignore. You cannot outperform your identity. You can temporarily earn more, temporarily succeed, temporarily stretch beyond your limits, but sooner or later your results will always fall back to the level of your internal self-image. This realization became one of the most important breakthroughs in the researcher's entire study. Billionaires do not simply think differently. They believe differently. They believe differently about who they are, what they're capable of, what they deserve, and what is possible for their lives. And it is this identity, not strategy, not luck, not timing, that ultimately determines the height of their success. The researcher first noticed this pattern during an interview with a former executive who worked with Howard Schultz. Schultz grew up in poverty, yet built one of the most recognizable global brands on earth. When asked how he overcame the mental limitations of his upbringing, Schultz said, "I had to learn to believe in a version of myself that didn't exist yet." That sentence struck the researcher so deeply that he wrote it on the first page of his notebook. Billionaires don't wait for success to validate their identity. They create an identity that produces success. This concept aligns with decades of psychological research, showing that the human brain is obsessed with identity consistency. The mind will always behave, decide, and create results that match its internal self-concept. If someone sees themselves as average, their brain will filter opportunities through the lens of limitation. If someone sees themselves as powerful and capable, their brain will reveal opportunities it previously ignored. This explains why two people can be given the same resources, same market, same opportunity, and same conditions, but one skyrockets while the other barely survives. Their inner identity selects their outer reality. The researcher began noticing how billionaires speak about themselves, and the pattern was unmistakable. Their language reflects identity, not circumstance. They speak as creators, builders, innovators, and leaders, even during moments of difficulty. Their identity doesn't collapse under pressure, it becomes stronger. This is why people like Oprah Winfrey rose from extreme adversity to global influence. She didn't wait for her environment to prove her worth. She carried her worth within her identity. And because she believed she had value, the world mirrored that belief back to her. One of the most powerful insights came from a conversation with a private billionaire in the tech industry. When the researcher asked how he maintained motivation during setbacks, the billionaire responded, "My results don't determine who I am. Who I am determines my results." This reversal of logic changes everything. Most people allow failure to weaken their identity. Billionaires allow identity to override failure. They don't interpret temporary outcomes as permanent truths. They understand that results fluctuate, but identity must remain stable. A crucial part of identity building, the researcher discovered, is emotional alignment. Billionaires don't just think wealthily, they feel wealthily. They cultivate emotions of confidence, certainty, and worthiness long before external evidence shows up. This emotional foundation becomes the energetic signature that aligns them with prosperity. They aren't waiting to feel abundant until they become wealthy. They feel abundant first, and wealth follows the frequency of that feeling. This is why they often describe their rise to success as inevitable, not because they had guarantees, but because they trusted the identity they were becoming. The researcher found that identity is shaped by stories, internal narratives that we unconsciously repeat until they become our truth. Billionaires rewrite these stories deliberately. They question the beliefs they inherited from childhood, from society, from past failures. They discard identities that limit them and adopt identities that propel them. They don't allow their upbringing to define their destiny. They consciously choose who they become. And because identity determines behavior, this internal shift creates a cascade of external changes. New decisions, new risks, new opportunities, new momentum. One of the entrepreneur interviews revealed something striking. Every time I wanted to reach a new financial level, I had to become a new version of myself. The old version couldn't access that level. This statement echoed across countless interviews. Billionaires consistently outgrow themselves. They shed identities the way snakes shed skin. They are constantly evolving into the version of themselves capable of holding more responsibility, more wealth, more influence, and more impact. They are not attached to who they used to be. They are loyal only to who they are becoming. This identity expansion also explains why wealthy individuals rarely collapse under pressure. Their identity is not fragile. It is not dependent on external validation. They aren't shaken by opinions, failures, or temporary setbacks. They see challenges as opportunities to reinforce their identity, not weaken it. When something goes wrong, they pivot. When something breaks, they rebuild. When something fails, they evolve. Their sense of self is rooted so deeply that external chaos cannot destabilize it. The researcher ultimately concluded that wealth is an identity game. You can study strategies, tactics, investments, or habits, but without the identity to hold wealth, you will subconsciously sabotage your own progress. This is why people who suddenly receive large sums of money, lottery winners for example, often lose everything within a few years. Their external wealth exceeded their internal identity. Their inner self-image couldn't sustain the new reality, so it pulled them back to the level where they subconsciously believed they belonged. On the other hand, individuals who adopt a wealth identity, even before the wealth manifests, often rise with remarkable speed. Their actions align, their decisions align, their emotions align, their opportunities align. Everything in their world begins reorganizing itself around the identity they hold most consistently. And over time, that identity becomes their lived reality. Identity is not just who you are. Identity is who you allow yourself to become. And the moment you elevate your internal self-image to match the life you desire, you unlock a level of success that previously felt impossible. Topic 6. The environment of wealth. How billionaires engineer their surroundings to shape their destiny. There is a moment in the researcher's work when he realized that billionaires weren't simply shaped by their environment. They shaped their environment with meticulous intention. This was one of the most transformative discoveries of the entire study. The wealthy do not leave their surroundings to chance. They're acutely aware that environment is not passive. It is an active force, constantly influencing beliefs, behavior, identity, and momentum. And because billionaires understand this, they structure their world in ways that reinforce the mindset, emotions, and habits required for extraordinary success. The researcher noticed early on that every billionaire he interviewed spoke about their environment with almost reverence. It wasn't about luxury or aesthetics. It was about psychological priming. Their environment was a mirror reflecting back the identity they were stepping into. They built offices that represented the future they were creating. They surrounded themselves with people who challenged them, inspired them, and expanded their vision. They designed routines, systems, and physical spaces that elevated their thinking instead of draining it. Nothing was accidental. One interview brought this into sharp focus. A billionaire real estate developer explained that when he was young, he used to take long drives through wealthy neighborhoods, not out of envy, but out of calibration. He said, "I needed my mind to normalize what wealth looked like. I had to become comfortable with abundance before I could create it." That sentence stayed with the researcher because it revealed the essence of how billionaires use environment. They place themselves in spaces that elevate their identity, not reinforce their limitations. This pattern appeared again during a conversation with a tech founder who scaled his company into a global powerhouse. He said that in the early days, he intentionally worked out of buildings that felt too large for his team. Not because he needed the space, but because he needed his mind to adapt to the feeling of expansion. He wanted to operate from the future, not the present. That environmental decision influenced his team, his decisions, and his vision. The space became a physical anchor for the goal he was relentlessly moving toward. The researcher also noticed something else. Billionaires curate the people around them with extreme precision. They don't allow negativity, scarcity, or small thinking into their inner circle, not because they feel superior, but because they understand how contagious environment truly is. Thoughts, emotions, energy, and expectations bleed from one person to another. And when you're building something massive, something few people can even conceptualize, you cannot afford to be influenced by fear-driven minds. Billionaires place themselves in environments where growth is normal, ambition is normal, resilience is normal, and abundance is normal. One billionaire in the study put it this way: "The fastest way to change your life is to change your environment. Your environment will upgrade you or imprison you." This was not poetic exaggeration. The researcher saw it repeatedly. Individuals who struggled financially often lived in environments filled with noise, chaos, distraction, and scarcity-based conversations. Meanwhile, wealthy individuals created environments that minimized decision fatigue, reinforced discipline, and cultivated clarity. Every part of their surroundings contributed to their focus. This concept also explains why billionaires prioritize mentors, networks, and masterminds. They constantly place themselves near people who think bigger than they do. When you're the smartest or most successful person in the room, your environment stops elevating you. Billionaires avoid this stagnation by choosing rooms that pull them upward. They seek proximity to those whose thinking challenges their assumptions and expands their horizon. Environment becomes a silent teacher, constantly pushing them into their next evolution. The researcher noticed that billionaires also design their digital environment carefully. Their phones aren't filled with distractions. Their inboxes aren't overflowing. Their days aren't consumed by chaos. They remove friction, eliminate noise, and protect their cognitive bandwidth with almost religious dedication. They understand that abundance requires space, mental space, emotional space, physical space. The average person clutters their environment and then wonders why clarity is impossible. Billionaires create space first, and clarity follows. Another powerful insight came from observing how billionaires manage their time environment. They treat their time as sacred, structuring their day around their highest value activities instead of reacting to everything that demands attention. They design their life with intention, not obligation. They align their calendar with their identity, not with other people's expectations. And because of that, their environment becomes a constant reinforcement of their purpose. One of the most surprising discoveries was how billionaires use environment to regulate their emotional state. They choose surroundings that promote calm, focus, and strength. Some use art to stimulate creativity. Some use minimalism to encourage clarity. Some use views of nature to cultivate long-term thinking. Every part of their environment is curated with purpose, always reminding them of who they are and who they are becoming. The researcher ultimately concluded that environment is one of the most powerful and overlooked drivers of wealth. You can have the right mindset, the right goals, the right habits, but if your environment contradicts your identity, your progress will collapse. Billionaires rise faster because their environment is aligned with their destiny. Their surroundings feed their greatness instead of starving it. The truth is simple. Your environment is either pulling you forward or pulling you backward. It is either reinforcing your limitations or reinforcing your potential. It is either shrinking your identity or expanding it. And the moment you take control of your environment with the same intentionality billionaires use, you begin to create a world that reflects your highest ambition instead of your past conditioning. Your environment is teaching you who you are every day. The question is, does it teach you to stay small or to rise? Topic 7. The hidden habits of the ultra-wealthy. Small daily actions that create massive fortunes. One of the most surprising revelations in the researcher's study came when he realized that billionaires are not defined by one grand, dramatic moment of success. Their wealth is built on small, almost invisible habits, tiny decisions repeated with ruthless consistency over long periods of time. The researcher expected to find complex systems or extraordinary routines, but what he discovered instead was a pattern of subtle habits that compound into immense results. It wasn't about doing extraordinary things once. It was about doing powerful things daily, long before the rest of the world pays attention. During an interview with a top executive who worked closely with Bill Gates, the researcher learned something remarkable. Gates wasn't successful because he worked nonstop or because he was obsessed with intensity. He was successful because he cultivated consistent intellectual habits. Reading daily, questioning assumptions, thinking deeply about problems long before they surfaced. It was the discipline of feeding his mind every single day that allowed him to see technological shifts years in advance. His habits didn't just make him smarter, they made him anticipatory. They trained his mind to live in the future. This theme appeared again when the researcher studied the early routines of Elon Musk. Long before Musk was a global icon, he practiced a habit of eliminating noise ruthlessly. If something didn't align with his mission, he removed it from his environment. If a task sucked his energy without contributing to progress, it was gone. This habit of ruthless prioritization allowed him to direct almost all his focus toward what mattered most. His success wasn't the result of superhuman work hours, it was the result of eliminating what didn't matter so the important things could flourish. Another billionaire revealed a habit the researcher found fascinating: daily identity rehearsal. Every morning, he spent a few minutes imagining the version of himself he was becoming. Not visualizing cars or mansions, visualizing the qualities, the decisions, the mindset, the emotional stability of his future self. This daily identity alignment became the anchor for all his choices. It prevented him from shrinking back into old patterns and kept him moving in the direction of expansion. Over time, the habit rewired his self-concept so powerfully that his actions began to feel effortless. The researcher found that wealthy individuals possess an extraordinary habit of emotional regulation. They don't allow fear, frustration, or anxiety to dominate their behavior. When emotions rise, they pause instead of react. They breathe instead of panic. They observe instead of collapse. This habit, practiced over years, becomes one of the most valuable psychological assets in wealth creation. Decisions made in calmness lead to growth. Decisions made in chaos lead to contraction. Billionaires master the habit of returning to calm quickly, and that emotional consistency becomes their superpower. Another subtle habit was the way billionaires treated their physical energy. They understood that the body is the fuel for the mind, and the mind is the engine of wealth. Their routines weren't always extreme, but they were intentional. Some meditated, some exercised, some walked outdoors, some took disciplined rest. The habit wasn't the specific activity. It was the commitment to sustaining energy. They treated their vitality as part of their wealth strategy because they knew that drained minds cannot create powerful ideas. The researcher uncovered a particularly interesting pattern in how billionaires handle information. They don't consume mindlessly. They don't drown in news, trends, gossip, or noise. They curate information the same way they curate their environment, selectively and intentionally. They feed their minds content that sharpens perception, expands awareness, and deepens understanding. Their habit of consuming only high-quality information gives them an advantage in decision-making, creativity, and opportunity recognition. Their knowledge compounds in the same way their wealth does. Another habit shared among billionaires was their approach to relationships. They invest in people long before they need them. They show up generously. They build trust slowly and intentionally. They treat relationships as long-term assets, not short-term transactions. This habit explains why opportunities often seem to find them. They've spent years building networks rooted in respect and value, so when life presents an opportunity, they're already connected to the people who can amplify it. The researcher also found that billionaires consistently practice the habit of taking action without overthinking. Most people spend their lives trapped in analysis. Billionaires move. They test. They iterate. They observe. They adjust. They trust their ability to figure things out as they go instead of waiting for perfect clarity before starting. This habit of quick initiation creates momentum, and momentum is one of the most underrated forces in wealth creation. Once momentum begins, opportunities multiply. Perhaps the most unexpected habit was how billionaires treat setbacks. They do not collapse under pressure. they lean in. They treat failure as feedback, disappointment as data, and obstacles as invitations to evolve. This habit of reframing adversity keeps them growing while others quit. One billionaire told the researcher, "Every time something goes wrong, I know life is upgrading me." This belief transforms challenges into catalysts. These habits, the researcher realized, are not glamorous. They are not dramatic. They are not the types of routines that go viral in motivational videos. But they are powerful, precisely because they are small, repeatable, and sustainable. Billionaires don't rely on motivation. They rely on identity-backed habits. Habits shape behavior. Behavior shapes destiny. And over time, these small, invisible habits create a life that outsiders mistake for luck or genius. The truth is simple. Wealth is built in the quiet moments long before the world is watching. The habits you practice when no one sees you are the ones that determine the results everyone eventually does see. Topic 8. The Billionaire Resilience Matrix: How the Wealthy Rise When Everything Falls Apart. There is a moment in every billionaire's story when everything seems to crumble. Markets crash, partnerships fail, products flop, investors disappear, and the dream appears to be collapsing. Yet somehow, these individuals rise higher after the breakdown than they stood before it. The researcher found this pattern so consistently that he began calling it the Billionaire Resilience Matrix, a psychological structure that determines how someone responds when life applies intense pressure. While most people contract under adversity, billionaires expand. They use the fall as the foundation for an even greater rise, and this ability becomes one of the defining factors of their long-term success. One of the most powerful examples came from the story of Walt Disney. After losing the rights to his own character early in his career, most people would have given up. Instead, he reimagined everything from scratch and created Mickey Mouse, launching a global empire. The researcher noted that Disney didn't just recover, he reinvented. This became a pattern. Billionaires respond to loss with reinvention, not resignation. They understand that adversity isn't the end. It's the invitation to step into a more powerful iteration of themselves. During an interview with a partner who worked closely with Richard Branson, the researcher learned that Branson's early ventures nearly destroyed him financially multiple times. Each time, instead of retreating, he used the chaos to expand into new industries. Branson didn't see failure as a personal flaw. He saw it as a signal that he had reached the edge of his current identity and was being pushed to grow. This emotional interpretation of adversity creates an unstoppable mindset. Most people shrink when they fail. Billionaires grow because they fail. The researcher discovered that at the heart of this resilience matrix is a fundamental belief billionaires carry. Challenges are neutral, and meaning is chosen. They don't see setbacks as punishments or cosmic signs that they're on the wrong path. They see setbacks as data, as a mirror reflecting what must evolve next. Their resilience is not born from toughness. It is born from interpretation. They choose empowering interpretations every single time. Another layer of this resilience matrix is that billionaires trust their long-term vision more than their short-term discomfort. They understand that temporary chaos does not mean permanent failure. When Tesla nearly collapsed, Elon Musk doubled down instead of walking away. When Amazon went years without profit, Jeff Bezos didn't panic. He persisted. Their visions weren't optional. They were non-negotiable commitments. And because of that, difficulty became a temporary inconvenience, not a defining moment. The researcher also noted that billionaires do not internalize failure into their identity. When the average person experiences a setback, they think, maybe I'm not good enough. Billionaires think, this system, strategy, or approach wasn't good enough. Yet, see the difference? One destroys identity, the other refines strategy. This separation between self-worth and outcome is one of the core reasons billionaires rebound quickly. Their self-image remains intact, so their ability to take action stays strong. Another critical element of the resilience matrix is emotional endurance. Billionaires feel fear, disappointment, and frustration like anyone else, but they do not allow these emotions to dictate their behavior. They have trained their nervous system to function under pressure, to breathe through uncertainty, to think clearly when others are overwhelmed. The researcher noticed that many wealthy individuals practiced some form of mental stillness, whether meditation, long walks, journaling, or deep focus exercises. not to escape stress, but to process it. They allow emotions to move through them without letting those emotions take control. One billionaire explained it in a way the researcher never forgot. Pressure creates diamonds only when you don't panic. This calmness under pressure is not genetic. It's trained. Billionaires repeatedly place themselves in situations that stretch their capacity. Over time, discomfort becomes normal. Adversity becomes familiar. Uncertainty becomes manageable. They expand their tolerance for chaos, and as their tolerance grows, so does their power. The resilience matrix also includes a profound understanding of timing. Billionaires know when to push and when to pivot. They don't confuse persistence with stubbornness. Persistence means staying committed to the vision. Stubbornness means refusing to adjust the strategy. The researcher saw that wealthy individuals pivot with incredible agility. If one door closes, they move to the next. If one approach dies, they design another. Their flexibility makes them unbreakable. Perhaps the most transformative discovery came when the researcher realized that billionaires see adversity as part of their identity, not an interruption of it. They expect challenges. They anticipate them. And because they expect them, they do not collapse under their weight. They rise with a sense of certainty that this too is shaping me. Their relationship with failure is fundamentally different. They see it as refinement, not rejection. Growth, not defeat. This emotional and psychological architecture becomes the foundation for unlimited success. It explains why some individuals rise from nothing to extraordinary wealth, while others remain stuck in cycles of fear and hesitation. Resilience is not about being unaffected by challenges. It's about being transformed by them. The researcher concluded that the true difference between those who achieve wealth and those who don't is not intelligence, background, or even opportunity. It is the ability to rise with greater strength each time life demands growth. Billionaires aren't superhuman. They are simply willing to evolve faster than their circumstances. Every major breakthrough in a billionaire's life can be traced back to a moment when everything went wrong. And instead of breaking, they expanded. Topic 9. The Law of Expansion. Why billionaires grow their wealth while others shrink their potential. There is a moment in the researcher's study where he recognized a pattern so universal, so undeniable, that it became one of the central pillars of the entire project. Every billionaire he interviewed, every founder, every investor, every industry titan, followed the same law, consciously or unconsciously. He called it the Law of Expansion, a psychological and behavioral principle that determines who grows, who stagnates, and who collapses under the weight of their own limitations. The law is simple. Everything in life is either expanding or contracting. Nothing stays neutral, and billionaires choose expansion every single time. The researcher first noticed this during an interview with a founding engineer who worked alongside Larry Page during Google's early years. He explained that Page had an almost obsessive desire to make things bigger, faster, more impactful, not for ego, but because he believed deeply that technology had a moral obligation to expand human potential. That worldview shaped his decisions, to innovate relentlessly, to solve problems others ignored, to dream beyond the constraints of the moment. Expansion was not just a strategy, it was an identity. This pattern repeated itself when the researcher interviewed a former strategist from the early days of Jeff Bezos. Bezos famously embraced the idea that companies must keep expanding to survive. Stagnation was death, progress was oxygen. Even when Amazon was unprofitable for years, his decisions were guided by the same principle. Expand the vision, expand the offerings, expand the customer experience, expand the infrastructure, expand the future. Bezos was not chasing quarterly comfort. He was constructing a global destiny. His wealth was simply the byproduct of expansion becoming a daily commitment. The researcher discovered that this law wasn't merely about company growth, it was about personal growth. Billionaires expand themselves first. Their skill sets expand. Their network expands. Their emotional intelligence expands. Their tolerance for discomfort expands. Their imagination expands. Their capacity for complexity expands. They are constantly growing into the version of themselves capable of holding the next level of wealth. That internal expansion precedes external financial expansion, always. One of the most profound moments in the research came during a conversation with a billionaire philanthropist. When asked how he continued evolving even after achieving massive financial success, he said, If I stop expanding myself, the universe stops expanding with me. This statement struck the researcher so deeply that he recognized the core truth hiding beneath it. Wealth is not static. Success is not static. Opportunity is not static. They flow toward individuals who are constantly becoming more, not those who are clinging to who they used to be. The researcher also noticed that people who struggle financially often live in a state of contraction. Their thoughts contract around fear. Their decisions contract around comfort. Their goals contract around what feels safe. Their self-image contracts each time they experience failure. And because everything in life reflects the internal state, their world becomes smaller. Their opportunities become fewer. Their financial capacity shrinks to match their contracting identity. In contrast, billionaires adopt an expanding identity even when their circumstances contradict it. They imagine bigger when life feels small. They take bold actions when results are uncertain. They invest when others retreat. They innovate when others stall. This commitment to expansion is not always logical, but it is always transformative. It creates a forward-moving energy that pulls new possibilities into their orbit. Another fascinating insight came from observing how billionaires make decisions about money. Most individuals view money through the lens of preservation. How do I avoid losing what I have? Billionaires view money through the lens of multiplication. How do I expand what I have? This mindset alone reshapes their financial reality. One person sees risk, the other sees leverage. One sees the possibility of loss, the other sees the inevitability of growth. This internal orientation toward expansion rather than contraction is the psychological foundation of wealth creation. The researcher discovered that expansion also governs how billionaires approach relationships. They gravitate toward people who think bigger, dream bigger, and operate from higher frequencies of ambition and purpose. They avoid environments and relationships that shrink their thinking. They do not allow themselves to be surrounded by people who reinforce limitation. Their network becomes a living ecosystem of expansion, elevating them daily, challenging them daily, and expanding their consciousness simply through proximity. One of the most transformative patterns of the law of expansion is how billionaires respond to opportunities. They say yes more often than they say no, but these aren't reckless yeses. They are courageous yeses, vision-aligned yeses, identity-expanding yeses. The average person declines opportunities because they don't feel ready. Billionaires accept opportunities because they trust they will grow into readiness. Opportunity becomes the training ground, not the reward. Their expansion happens through the challenge, not before it. The researcher ultimately came to the conclusion that expansion is not something billionaires experience. It is something they choose. Every day, in every decision, in every belief, in every emotional response. They choose the path that requires growth, not the path that maintains comfort. They choose the identity that stretches them, not the identity that protects them. They choose the future that demands evolution, not the past that feels familiar. This is why billionaires continue rising, even after they lose everything. Their external world may collapse, but their internal expansion never stops. And the world eventually reorganizes itself around that expansion. It must. Reality always reflects the dominant internal state. In the end, the law of expansion is simple. You rise when you grow. You stagnate when you stop. You collapse when you contract. And the wealthy rise because growth is not just a habit, it is their default state of being. Topic 10. The Awakening. The moment you realize you were always meant for more. As the researcher concluded his multi-year journey into the minds and lives of billionaires, he came to a realization that shook him more deeply than any interview, any statistic, or any psychological pattern he had uncovered. It was the realization that everything he had learned pointed back to one truth. Wealth is not reserved for the chosen few. It is not the privilege of the lucky, the gifted, the genius, or the extraordinary. Wealth is the natural result of aligning your identity, your decisions, your emotions, your environment, and your habits with the frequency of expansion, possibility, and creation. In other words, the difference between those who rise and those who struggle is not fate, it is consciousness. The more he studied billionaires, the more he saw that they were not born special. They were not destined from childhood for greatness. Many of them came from nothing, faced rejection, endured failure after failure, and lived through periods of doubt so intense that most people would have given up. What separated them was not their circumstances, but their willingness to see reality not as it was, but as it could be. They refused to let external conditions dictate their inner world. Instead, they allowed their inner world to shape their external conditions. One of the final interviews the researcher conducted was with a billionaire entrepreneur who had built and lost multiple companies before creating the one that made him one of the wealthiest individuals in his industry. When asked what kept him going after losing everything, twice, he said, "I realized I wasn't chasing wealth. I was chasing the version of myself who could create it." That sentence became the heart of the conclusion. Billionaires do not chase money. They chase identity. They chase possibility. They chase the unfolding of a self that is more powerful, more courageous, more strategic, and more aligned with abundance than the self they were yesterday. The researcher saw clearly that every billionaire he studied lived by a principle most people never consider. Life expands or contracts to the level of your expectations. If you expect little, you receive little. If you expect struggle, you create struggle. If you expect mediocrity, life will happily deliver it. But when you expect greatness, not from arrogance, but from inner knowing, the world begins to rearrange itself around your belief. The universe responds to the frequency you hold most consistently, and billionaires hold the frequency of inevitability. The conclusion was not that everyone should become a billionaire. The conclusion was that everyone has the capacity to unlock levels of potential, creativity, and prosperity they never imagined possible. You were not meant to live in survival. You were not designed to live trapped inside old stories, old limitations, or inherited beliefs that do not belong to you. You were built for expansion. Your mind was wired for creation. Your identity was meant to evolve, and your destiny is far larger than the circumstances you were born into. The researcher realized that the transformative power of wealth is not the money itself, but the person you become while creating it. Wealth requires clarity, discipline, courage, emotional intelligence, resilience, creativity, and a willingness to grow relentlessly. These qualities, once activated, spill into every area of life: relationships, health, purpose, influence, self-expression. Wealth becomes proof that you are living in alignment with your potential. Proof that you have stepped into the version of yourself who is no longer hiding, shrinking, or playing small. In the end, the greatest secret the researcher discovered was this: the pathway to wealth is the pathway to self-discovery. Every challenge forces you to grow. Every breakthrough expands your identity. Every moment of discomfort builds your resilience. Every decision builds your momentum. Wealth is not the reward. It is the reflection, a mirror showing you who you have become. He realized that the billionaire mind is not something you are born with. It is something you choose. It is something you cultivate. It is something you step into each time you decide to expand instead of contract, to move instead of freeze, to reinvent instead of surrender. Your circumstances do not define you. Your past does not imprison you. Your beliefs are flexible. Your identity is malleable. Your future is waiting for you to claim it. And the most extraordinary truth of all is this: nothing separating you from the world's most successful people is unchangeable. Everything is learnable. Everything is trainable. Everything is available the moment you decide that your life is meant for more, and that you are willing to grow into the person capable of receiving it. This is your awakening. The moment you realize that you are not chasing wealth, you are becoming the version of yourself who naturally creates it. Your mind is the key. Your identity is the foundation. Your expansion is the path. And your destiny is already waiting for you to step into it. If something in this video awakened something inside you, if you felt even a spark of possibility, a reminder of who you're capable of becoming, then don't let this moment fade. Protect it, act on it, expand it. Subscribe to the channel so you can continue unlocking the mindset, the identity, and the inner power that create real wealth. Like this video, so it reaches more people who are ready to rise. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Someone you know is meant for more, but hasn't been reminded of it lately. And comment below with the biggest insight you're taking from this journey. Your breakthrough may be the spark that inspires someone else's transformation. This is your time. This is your evolution. And we're just getting started. Welcome to the Success and Prosperity Code. Let's rise together.